things that are used in training, so it's just I can't resist a PowerPoint. And also it'll keep me on task. But what I wanted to talk about today, how I wanted to frame my 5 minutes that I have, is I just wanted to frame it in kind of talking about what I learned about information literacy once I left a library. So what did I learn when I left that space? And if you will bear with me and give me about 45 seconds, I want to take you on a whirlwind tour of my career path. I use that term loosely. This path sounds like I intended all of the things that I did. So what I did was I started with an undergraduate degree in studio art, and what else is there to do with that undergraduate degree in studio art but get a master's degree in studio art, so that's what I did. And then I taught some college art classes, and I taught art appreciation, and I taught studio art, and learned by the seat of my pants and how to teach. And then I was a slide librarian in the art department there. And that's when I got wind of this MLIS degree. You know, what is this thing? And I was intrigued, so I enrolled in UNCG's program, and while I was working on my degree, I worked in a large academic library, I worked in a public library. When I got my degree, I got my dream job, and I was working for CPCC. It's a community college in Charlotte, and I worked for the library there as the e-learning librarian because I was all about some online learning, and what are our online students getting for library instruction, and who's doing this? So we started the embedded librarian program to make sure that the online students, the students that were in those online classes, were getting library instruction, all the good, awesome library instruction that our in-person students were getting. I did that for 3 years there, and then kind of surprisingly, I was offered to apply for an instructional designer position with Nov102012. And Nov102012 is a large kind of umbrella health company that has several large hospitals in the Charlotte, Winston-Salem, Virginia area, and they also have medical groups. And so I was going to be an instructional designer for their training department for the hospitals for the revenue side. So, oh my gosh, here's the artist slash librarian, now turned instructional designer in a healthcare setting on the revenue side, doing training for finance stuff, and wow, oh wow, did I feel like, you know, sort of an alien in a little weird place. But that's when I really started thinking about thinking more about information literacy and how it was really informing how I was designing the training that I was making. I was still doing my thing. I was still doing it, and I was so excited. So my first big project was to redesign the new hire training. So this is when any new person is hired into Novant, and they are going to be working like in inpatient admitting or at registration for the emergency department. So when you come into the emergency room, that first person you talk to, they're taking all your information, all your insurance information, having you sign a consent form. Those are the folks that I'm designing the training for. So the original class that they had was 5 days, 8 hours of lecture. Lecture, y'all. 8 hours. 5 days. And it was great, and it was encompassing, and it was good, but it was overwhelming. It was a lot of stuff that folks were having to learn. It's a computer system that they're having to learn. They're having to learn the laws that go around signing consent forms. They're having to learn privacy practices, advanced directives, living wills. Okay, you're getting me? And insurances. All the insurances. What insurances do we accept? What are we doing? So they had some hands-on stuff that they were doing, but it really wasn't structured in any way that was taking them from a more simple task to a more complex task. So when we started sitting down and redesigning it, and a lot of it was based on like rote memorization. You just got to remember it, just drilling it into you. Now, let's go back to our library examples of citations. I can sit in front of a room, and I can drill you on, you need a period here, you need your quotation marks here, but all I'm teaching is that citations really suck, and that they're boring, and I don't know how to do them. That's all I've really taught you at that point. So if I teach you why citations are relevant, when you use them, where you might find the information to get and to make your citations when you're ready to make that, now I'm getting somewhere. Now I'm doing something. I'm teaching you, how to find that information. So if you ask me, what is my perspective on information literacy? My perspective about information literacy is, at its base, it is learning how to learn. I'm teaching you how to learn. So learning how to interact with information, when we're teaching people how to judge the information they're looking at, when we're teaching people how to seek out that information, I am teaching them how to learn, plain and simple. That's how I see it. So in my institution and where I am, we're calling information literacy by a different name, but we're really constantly teaching trainees how to be astute when looking at information. We're teaching them how to be discerning when they're gathering information from a patient. So when a patient says that, well, I have Medicare because I'm on disability, and they start talking about end-stage renal disease, that should be a red flag for me to know that, wait a minute, you have Medicare for a different reason. So I have to teach people how to think about information. It's not just a rule you got to memorize and you got to follow. You do have to be critical thinkers. So I'll give you a concrete example if you can stand me rambling on just a little bit more. There's a concrete example from one of our trainings. So there's certain rules and regulations that inform who can sign a consent form. And it's a whole list of, if you're a minor, you can't sign your own consent form, well, unless you're married. And you can sign it if you're married, but if you also live at home, there's all of these caveats to when and where you can sign a consent form. You're not supposed to remember this. Don't remember this stuff. Our brain is too precious. Don't stuff all that stuff in there. But what you can learn is how to use this form that we've designed and how to use the information that we've put out there for you to find that answer. Again, we have a blue million insurances that we accept, right? So we have financial plan codes that you're supposed to learn. There's lots of them. But we're not teaching trainees how to memorize this, that Aetna is an I-44. Who wants that in their brains? We're teaching them how to use the sheets that we've designed, the database of reference sheets, so that they know how to get that information and they're not having to commit this to memory. And also, Dr. Hershberger's going to think I'm kind of like sucking up to her right now, but one of my very first classes that I ever took in library school, it was her class, and she told us about her research and information-seeking behaviors, and I go back to that all the time. I don't know how many times I use this in meetings. Do you know people's natural information-seeking behaviors is, they think I'm really crazy sometimes, but I talk a lot about, it just stuck with me that, that sort of first line of inquiry is going to be, hey, John, do you know how to, that's going to be our first line of inquiry sometimes. And that was not necessarily her research, but that was what got me on that path. But so we designed a Ask an Educator email inbox, so our staff can email right away if they've got a question. They can get in contact. I've almost had to create a reference library, but so they email someone directly if they've got a question about something. So we designed that program, and I think a lot about how people seek information. When I'm designing something for them. So as it turns out, I really didn't leave my librarian hat behind at all. I'm thankful for my experience with information literacy, because not only is it a vital skill for me, it's definitely a vital skill, but it's something that we're trying to impart on our trainees all the time. And I'm going to get off script just for a second, but I was thinking about, everybody has all of these feeders, and you're kind of running into most of the staff that I'm training. None of them have any formal degrees. It's mostly high school education. So it's really very similar to my community college experiences. So the folks that I'm working with are really still on that same level that I was used to working with in the community college. So that's been really useful too. But anyway, the point I wanted to make was that I learned a lot about my library skills once I was outside of that library environment, and understanding how people interact with information has been invaluable for my position as an instructional designer. So that's it.
During the 2012-2013 fiscal year, I am being funded via an LSDA grant to bring job finding assistance from the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library to the Urban Ministry Center of Charlotte. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library opened a job help center in 2010 and has served numerous library users since then by way of 5.5 full-time equivalent staff, 32 plus public access computers, and a healthy battery of books, magazines, and online tools for resume building, interviewing, and job finding. The Urban Ministry Center of Charlotte assists about 600 individuals per day with a variety of services, including lunch, nursing services, a computer lab, mail service, laundry, showers, counseling, a community garden, transportation assistance, street soccer, an art studio, a running club, and referrals to numerous other agencies. The library's LSTA grant, Job Help for the Homeless, aspires to bring the knowledge, skills, and resources of the main library Job Help Center to the computer lab of the Urban Ministry Center. The objective is to, number one, serve the homeless at the Urban Ministry Center this year with the same level of job finding service that would be accessed at the main library. And number 2, to train the volunteers at the Urban Ministry Center to sustain the same level of service to the homeless after the grant year's over. We wanted there to be a sustainability factor following the grant. In the context of information literacy, a couple of factors immediately come into play. One is that this grant involves 2 organizations, the Public Library and the Urban Ministry Center, and therefore 2 distinct cultures. Even though the Public Library and the Urban Ministry Center serve many of the same customers, meaning the homeless in uptown Charlotte, the approaches can be a little bit different. The Public Library is a steward of information resources such as books, periodicals, and automated resources, and provides access to these resources in an equitable manner. All of society's patron groups are ensured of access to these resources. The Urban Ministry Center's primary focus pretty much is the relationships it builds with the homeless individuals whom it serves. To this end, information literacy takes on a variety of colors. Number 1, information literacy for staff members of the Urban Ministry Center is equivalent to knowledge of the clientele. A chief example of this is in the annual, quote, survey at the gate, unquote, which was just completed in October of 2012. The information gained from personal interviews with every user of the Urban Ministry Center service allows the service providers of the Urban Ministry Center to have the information they need to effectively serve the visitors to the center. For example, it is through the survey at the gate that someone can learn that out of 512 individuals surveyed, which was the number of people who came that day. It was October 29th. It was the coldest day in the year. And we had to stand out in the parking lot and interview everybody. So it was an interesting experience. 54% have dealt with substance abuse. 32% have dealt with mental health issues. Some having dealt with both, and 32% have a physical disability. In the midst of these factors is the survey response to the final question, besides what you are here to do today, what do you need most? 155 out of the 512 said housing, but the next most prominent response was employment, 127. This information is crucial to success in helping these individuals because not realizing that the individuals who desire employment have a fairly high incidence of substance abuse and mental illness could lead to inappropriate referrals by staff, unreasonable expectations on the part of employers, discouragement by staff in their efforts to place the homeless in jobs, or frustration on the part of the homeless individuals if they are placed in positions which are beyond their current ability to cope with workplace stress. Number 2, information literacy for the homeless runs a gamut from how to use a computer, a keyboard, and a mouse, how to find a job listing on the computer, how to apply for a job, how to access food stamps, how to find temporary or permanent shelter, how to locate agencies which have programs just waiting to assist them, but they might be totally unaware of, or how to stay alive for another day. This is information literacy for the homeless. Information literacy for volunteers, number 3, Urban Ministry Center staff members and for public library staff would include a broad knowledge of the community and an awareness of the services which can be accessed to help the homeless in their situations. This requires an outreaching attitude which consistently seeks to learn more about options which exist in the local area. Number 4, information literacy for the community in general could be regarded as walking in the shoes excuse me, of a homeless individual for an hour, a day, or a week to see the issues at play in these people's lives. Some of this type of information literacy can be a result of advocacy and can be helped by involvement in agencies like the main library's Job Help Center or Urban Ministry Center. And number 5, for the library science instructor or student, who anticipates having to reach this population, information literacy would include awareness of the homeless population and its accompanying characteristics. Number 2, people skills, which were developed enough to deal with the slowest learners they may have ever encountered. I mean, some individuals, the other day I was working with a gentleman on a resume, and I wanted him to do the work because we want them to be empowered and eventually to run their own job search. But he was finding the keys about 1 every 5 seconds. By the end of the time, that 2 hours we spent at working on his resume, he hit a button that caused everything to disappear from the screen. I asked a woman in the office, I said, what could he have possibly done? That would have taken work to make all that information disappear. But she said, if you hit the refresh button, that can make everything go away. So the positive, though, was when he came back to do it again, he had typing practice. And by the time he was done, he was actually going like A, C, C, period. And he was getting faster, but it's still one finger. But, he improved. So anyway, those things. Community awareness, which consistently probed the local area for agencies, is also helpful. Names, addresses, and phone numbers of potential partners in serving the homeless community. And lastly, patience in helping these individuals to learn and to grow out of their personal crises. And it's interesting to work with a population that no matter who you talk with, they're pretty much in crisis. It's almost a given. Information literacy can be thought of as navigating an increasingly automated world, which we've covered, having the technology skills to deal with online information or in general to become tech savvy. But in the world of homeless people, information literacy can boil down to whatever information it takes to survive another day.
Thank you all very much. So I have an overarching question, but I'm going to wait and see if there were any burning questions from the audience that for any of the panelists before we get started with my question. Yes,
I
Mary.
have a burning question.
Okay.
To ask Jennifer Balance with no bond, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You mentioned, to your surprise, you were contacted by someone from Novant to leave the work you were doing to come to work with them. My question is, how did you encounter that person?
Okay, well, and because I did leave out some details in my condensed version, so. But I was at CPCC, and I was working with someone outside of the library on a quality improvement plan proposal, and a QEP is, we did, I don't know, is that a common term? Is that a common thing? So we were working on a quality.
It is because we're going through that.
Okay. So we were working on a QEP, on a quality improvement plan, and a proposal for one. And we were dealing with information literacy, and it was just a coworker. She worked in first year experience, and had also been doing some work in student life. So she was in first year experience at that point. So some of the work that we were doing in the library was crossing over with what she was doing in first year experience, and we worked on a project there. She had got recruited by Novant from someone she knew, and when they needed to redesign some programs, they had a position open, and she invited me to apply. So it was just from kind of networking with and working on an actual project. So she knew a working experience with me. I grabbed someone from my library too when I left. So it was kind of a domino kind of thing. Well, I need, because we knew what specific skills we needed. So that's how that happened.
Okay. Any other burning questions? Any questions online? No questions. So my question is, Sarah, you pretty much think, when you're done working with these students, some of them at least are information literate. So when they get to Jenny, how come she doesn't feel like there's very many of them that are information literate? what do you think happens, or what do you think we're not doing at that level, or what do you think some of the causes of that situation are?
I have a very good answer.
Okay, then we'll tag.
Yes, let's do it. Let's do it.
Number one is librarians, while we have a set of standards, there are librarians that have done this since the day a computer was never put in front of them. So there's a comfort level. We all have them. Okay? When they first put the iPad in my hands and I went, oh, it takes a minute. And then you gain your own skills, your own proficiencies, and you pass that on. So it doesn't make you a poor instructor or a good instructor to have certain skills, but it influences what your students take from you because you don't realize how much of yourself you put in that. Secondly, information literacy, when you call it a spectrum, that sometimes there's a gap in the spectrum. So for instance, if my 8th graders work on citations religiously with me, and then they don't touch research again until their senior year project because of some quirk, well, what you don't use naturally falls to the back. And it takes someone like these ladies to spark and say, have you ever heard this before? And even then, there's some pride there. No, I've never heard that before, because obviously if I had, I would be showing you. So no, I've never heard it.
And do you know what? I would even take that one further and say that it's when I'm looking at librarianship, we're partners with the faculty. As an instructional designer, I'm partners with the content experts. So there's onus on both sides of it. So you can teach them all they want, but if they're not practicing it, like, which is what you're saying, but also if it's not required, like if good sources are not required, then it doesn't matter what I teach you, because if I can do the easier thing, if I can do the simpler thing, then I will. I would do that. I'm all about that. So I think sometimes if faculty are not requiring, a certain level of sources and information and critically looking at that information, then we can teach all day long to have those skills, but it's not really going to make any difference. And that was about the QP.
Yes.
We were partnering with them.
And that's the constant struggle. You know, the English teachers that came with me and said, let's work on citation. Let's show them how to use the online tools to build them. And then the next day, the science teacher walked in, who I love and adore. He is a dynamic teacher, and he says, we're going to do a photo story. And I said, how are we going to cite where we're getting our images from? He says, and I went into spazzola mode. I said, I'm not helping with this project unless you include that. And you only 1 fit of righteous indignation per quarter. See, I was listening in class too. So I put my righteous indignation on, and I said, that's it. You don't know how to use this software program, and I do. And if you want my help, you're putting it in there.
So holding information hostage is a
Yeah.
great path to take, evidently.
Yeah. But then he stopped and he said, why are you so passionate about this? I said, you're disservicing your student. You think you're making their path easier, and in the short term you are, but the long term you're not.
But that ethical use of information, I do think, is very important. Where did I get this information, and where does it lead back to? And if I'm thinking about, I have to be ethical about using my information, then I'm also thinking, where did I get it? Because I'm looking, it's just real simple like that. But I think that is something that across whatever profession, when you're partnering up like that, and I think librarians, we are partners. We're partners with our faculty, we're partners with whatever those stakeholders are that we have in it. And you can't, it's going to always be one-sided and not effective. It's like listening to one side of a cell phone conversation,
And you had used the word transfer when you were making your comments. Sometimes the transfer of knowledge from one seeming domain to another domain, I used this in English class. How do I use this in math class?
Right.
Sometimes that's a really difficult transfer.
How do I use this when I'm making a political decision?
Right.
It's and I know when we're in library classrooms, a lot of times we definitely, I would say that, and I love what you were talking about nurses. Heck yeah, you want to stay up to date on some stuff, so really.
Yeah, I'm not going to the hospital.
Yeah. So I think that's
I think for
helping
us,
them see the applicability.
yeah, I think for us, like at the level the students that I'm working with, those partnerships with faculty are huge. And something that you had touched on, I think too, is the students having an assignment when they come in. That really, really helps them focus, and it makes it a little easier when it's time to transfer that knowledge from, in our case, we have a Psychology 150, Introduction to Psychology, and I use that as my example a lot because they have a common assignment. All Psych 150 students on our campus complete the same research assignment. By a wonderful bit of serendipity, the instructor who started the assignment is also my best friend, so I was able to say, let me help you write this assignment with an eye to our resources. So we were able to do that. Now we're in all of the psychology classes. Almost all of them now will call one of our librarians and they'll schedule time with us. We're making it relevant to the assignment, so they've got that. And then we also work to try to make it relevant to transfer it for our students to English 111 or whatever. So I think that transfer of knowledge is a big idea, and it's an important factor to think about when we're doing information literacy classes and trying to teach those skills.
And I would even say, and that's the note that I kind of wrote down to myself, where Jenny was talking about those one-shot library classes. They can feel really frustrating sometimes, but I think that's when they're most effective, when you really partnered up with those faculty and the assignment has something to do, because they're as much as we say, oh, you're adult learners and you're sort of driven intrinsically, well, whatever. I want that. I know that I'm going to be driven to do it if I have an assignment, if I'm going to do it. And then once I've done it, I was like, that's not so bad. It's kind of, you get it from there and you're going to use that skill again. But I think, again, with those one-shot library classes is when they're effective, when you're partnering up and it's an assignment that is going to carry out, and then
And you're using the skill in context,
yes,
not in isolation.
Yes, exactly.
I think for me, when I do, because I work with students once, it's really hard for me to gauge their information literacy skills when they come in, because time is really, precious in those sessions, so you really have to decide, you have to prioritize. But, there are a lot of things I think that happen with information literacy in the K-12 arena that happen so seamlessly that maybe students don't even necessarily understand that they're happening. Does that make sense to you? So they come in and they think, yeah, I've looked at websites, I've done website trials, that kind of stuff. They're not necessarily thinking this is something that I can use when I look at a scholarly source, and looking at evaluating these, a different kind of evaluation, but you still have to have the same kind of critical skills to do that. And so I think it's usually there. It's just lots of different comfort levels and just different ranges of experience where they're coming from. And I think, in high school too, there's definitely a lot of testing. And I think that's something that we are kind of not talking about right now, but there's a lot of testing in public schools, and not to say that that's good or bad, but sometimes that takes time away from writing a big research paper. And if you learned how to do citations, and if I learned something 4 years ago and then you ask me to sit down and do it now, I don't think I could probably do that. So if I learned citations in 8th grade and then I'm writing my big senior project, it's like I know I've talked about that before, but I just remember it was really hard and we had practice all the time. So there's not necessarily a continuity that you feel if you're not putting it into practice all the time.
I have a burning question now. I'm going to be honest. Information literacy is not a term I like. Okay? I think we like it in libraries, don't we? We're real fervent about this. So thank you. We just had this thing called an election, right? And there were people called low information voters. So I want to talk. So if we have reading literacy, there are different levels, right? There's functional literacy, there's high literacy levels. So if we have information literacy, that would be information literates. I would say 99% of the population not involved in schools or academia don't really need to know how to cite literature.
Agreed.
Once you've graduated, you're out of that, maybe for your job, but in real life, read Huffington Post. They're not citing people. So, whose information illiterate, does this mean that all of these people that are out there in real life every day that go to Google every 5 seconds, that go to Wikipedia, are we discounting their information seeking behaviors because they're not going to a library or to more accurate services? So are all these low information voters informationally illiterate? So if someone's information literate, who's illiterate?
Wow,
You
that's
wanna
good.
go? Leave it to Hirschberger. Well
The
done.
people that I train.
From my perspective, this is me as my thought. So here we go. The people that are information illiterate are the ones that don't take the time to critically evaluate whatever information they have placed in front of them.
Yes, but again, with my information for voting, if you voted against my candidate, then you're a low information voter. Who gets to determine that? And where's that? You talked about standards, Sarah.
I know.
You
I know.
voted.
I stand by standards.
Yeah, standards for schools, so we
Right.
don't have standards. So I understand the
Right.
sentiment, but what does that mean?
Look at her winking at us. I haven't had that happen in 6 years. Okay, so
Sarah.
that's okay. I'll keep coming. I think it's first off. I think it's a media term, and I think the media spent. When I'm teaching, I also still teach, despite it being out of the curriculum, propaganda techniques, media techniques, searching for bias. All right. Now, whether all that sinks in, I don't know. But I think it's my duty to make an intelligent, well-rounded person who is capable of finding what they need to make the best decision. Is it sitting in a standard? Do I have a way to assess it? Have I gone behind my graduates and said, I need to know how you voted in this election because we got to talk? No. But despite it not being standardized, it becomes part of the conversation because it also becomes part of relevant teaching. When we're talking about doing something in context, okay, the political arena in the last month and a half has been the most fun thing to talk about with students as they're sitting at a computer. Where are you going for information? When you look at the news channels, what is the bias of this channel versus this channel? And the social studies teachers were having that very same conversation and then pulling me in, and I didn't even know they were doing it because here come all these kids. Hey, Miss Fresher, what do you think about so-and-so and so-and-so and so? What do you think about Carl this? And what do you think about so-and-so? And what about... Whoa, where are you coming from, kiddos? Because I was not expecting them to run down the stairs, and my media center is literally a cave under the stairs, into the cave and say, Miss Fresher, I had no idea the social studies teachers were up to it. But they had started something, and then it just kind of filtered through. So standard-wise, I cannot answer you. But from a point of view, I would hope one of my goals is to have a globally aware citizen who can get what they need to make discerning decisions. I try it in different ways. Others?
Do you know, I'm going to interrupt, I'm so sorry. Before you even got started. But do you know, I'm sitting here thinking about this, and if I watch how people, because now I'm not around librarians all day long, so I'm out in general population, and it's really
It's very different.
interesting. My coworkers, my very intelligent coworkers, I watch their information-seeking behaviors. And Google is the great oracle. And actually, it's interesting because if you think about, I really think what librarians ought to get doing is getting involved with our search engines, getting involved with how we get the information, because I'm guilty of it, and I've got a whole lot of education behind me. I'm guilty of that. First Google search is good enough for me. I'll just like kind of use that. I mean, I'm going to be honest here. I said it out loud.
That's
and
okay.
evidently on streaming. But I use that first thing. Or sometimes I won't even read the whole website. I'm just like looking at all of these things. Or like I said, I'll just ask my neighbor. I just ask my friend. It's a good thing that I have very smart friends. Beth, I'm looking at you. I'm calling them up, texting them, asking them these things, even though I know what I'm supposed to do. So
Well,
I don't know if that answers anything but
I just like to hear what
Oh,
John was going to say
yes,
before.
Well, with literacy, you have people who maybe have a vocabulary of 2,000 words, and they can communicate. They can ask for what they need, and perhaps get from point A to point B. But then in Shakespeare, we're supposed to have a vocabulary of 50,000 words, extremely literate. So you can do more the higher your literacy rate goes, at least with the language and with understanding individuals and expressing yourself. And so if we took that same idea into information literacy, you've got more opportunities, the more aspects of information access that you develop. If all you can do is turn the TV on, you're limited. I mean, that's your information source. And what they tell you, you're stuck with. But if you're totally information literate, I mean, and to a high degree, and you can find anything, it seems like your opportunities grow with really evaluating and vetting an issue from start to finish. So I think there are levels of literacy, and we'd be shooting for we'd be the front runners as librarians to push for the highest possible level of literacy in information literacy. Like anything that's available, we can find it.
I want to acknowledge Leanne, sorry. Brain and Fati had his hand raised, so Leanne?
I just want to sort of comment on what Jennifer was saying. I don't know that there's necessarily anything wrong with using the first Google result. And thinking about what Dr. Hirschberger is talking about, general population, and asking a friend, I think a lot of people in society do get their information that way. And I think that depending on your information need, that could be perfectly reliable. And I don't think that you should have to, cover your mouth as a librarian saying that you would use Google or ask a friend if it's good enough for Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. and I wonder, anyone who wants to make a pumpkin pie, how many different avenues they could approach to get that information, and none of them are wrong. They might ask their grandmother, or they might look on Google. But, I don't know that every information need really needs to be so vetted and at the very highest pinnacle of
swatting the mosquito with the nuclear bomb.
But
But
retroactive.
but as long as Google stays not evil, yeah.
Yeah.
As long as Google or our search engines are, as long as we're watching that, as long as we're figuring out who has control of our information. I mean, I don't mean to sound like I'm standing on a soapbox, but I agree. As long, we have to be aware, and it is not the magic 8 ball. There are people behind it. There are.
Fati?
Just a comment on Julie's curveball question, because I think Jennifer gave a pretty good answer, because we should not get confused about information literacy and the decision making. They are two different things. You may have all the information, yet you may make a different decision.
I don't want to change my mind, right?
I mean, we all know that we should exercise, we should jump through and all that kind of things. Yet, we do a lot of stuff. So you may get all that information that you need, yet you make the right. So don't get confused.
I think that's such a good point.
Yes.
That's such a good point. Yeah, because I don't want to change my mind a lot of times, right?
Information literacy and decision making are two different things. Yes, go ahead, Jim.
I just was going to ask John about money. We went, this election was all about money, and most of us are not in that ballpark. I'm wondering about people who don't have computers, who don't have televisions, and who really get their information off the street at the homeless camp, or and maybe never had exposure to those things. And do we have enough places in our environments? Because all we're talking about here is very controlled. It's what we can control. It's what we're paid to control. But what about the fact that I can go in my office any day of the week and play on Facebook, and I can play on my computer in addition to working on my computer. I can find the information I need, and I can just play with this machine. And most of our society does not have that freedom to play. When they go into the library, for example, I have seen public libraries where they're expected to make a certain use
Right.
of that computer. They are not encouraged to play on the computer.
Right.
And it's something, I think, to always keep, it may be just a comment on my part, but I think it's something to keep in mind about who we are as librarians. That's all.
I agree totally.
That's a nice
and
point.
I think
We're very privileged.
every morning at the Urban Industry Center, when we have a volunteer, we open the lab for what we call computer use. And that can be somebody sitting there watching UFC wrestling or whatever they call that. It's some element of pain infliction. But it might be wrestling, I don't know. But whatever they do, I'm totally in favor of that because it lets them do what you call play. It lets them plunk on the keys, get acquainted with the culture, stay in the mainstream of life, because they are limited on the street to what they can learn from their buddies. Which is not to say that that's not a good deal of information. They're pretty smart. And toward the beginning of being in the Urban Ministry Center, I made the mistake of leaving my keys on the desk near the door, and I was over working with somebody on their resume. So toward the end of the day, I realized, I thought my keys were there. And then when I went out in the parking lot, I thought my car was there. So that led, to the odyssey of trying to find the car, which came back about 8 days later. The police were great at locating it. But, I've sort of felt around to see, hey, what have you guys heard about my car lately? Because they have their own grapevine, and somebody among that group knew where that car was. But to say, all that to say, to get on a computer, it expands massively what they're allowed to do. Every afternoon we tell them this is just for job finding. And at the Job Help Center in the library, they can get on the computer for 3 hours, but it's only job finding. So we do kind of limit sometimes their play time, but I think it's important that, because they don't have money enough for a newspaper.
Well, and I think too, and I think you bring up a good point when you're talking about familiarity with the tool. It comes from that sort of low pressure, just being able to experiment with it. I mean, I watch my little kids, and my mom goes, "Look how they just zip through that iPad and use your phone." And I was like, "Yeah," because it's like a pencil to them. My mom is amazed, but this is really easy. And I saw it with community college students. I see it with the people I work with now. And there's articles, even how, I don't have my phone with me actually, but that's most ways how people interact with the computer. And then when you get on a desktop computer to use, the faculty are like, well, why can't my students use a computer? Because actually most of their internet access has been through phones. So that, and to use a desktop to write papers, that's something completely different. So I think that's a good thing to always keep in our minds about that sense of privilege, that sense of that play is important. We had in community college, you can only be working on scholarly academic things on the computer. Well, who gets to judge that? Because now I get all my NPR news from my Facebook page, thank you. So, okay.
Well, and reflecting and retooling what we've thought in the past.
Right.
What has always been the standard doesn't mean it was always right, okay? Or you go and you read someone's dissertation on how the homeless seek their information.
All right, don't do that.
Okay, but are we, at the end of the year, whatever our year end may be, are we saying, okay, I think I did this really well. Now, where did I not serve that needs me? And so the reflection of.
I just want to acknowledge Clara, and that will be the last comment.
Okay. The discourse around information literacy is as an analytical, logical process, right? We teach steps so then we'll be competent and it'll be a skill. I'm wondering if you can talk about the affective part, the emotional part, because I know how to search, but I go, okay, I found that, I'm not going to look at that website. Political information, oh, it's about that other side. So can you talk about the affective part and whether you incorporate that into your teaching?
I think that's really hard with information literacy, but I think it's really important. So I think that's a really good question. Part of what I try to do in the classroom is to just make it a little bit more fun. because then you're having kind of this, I mean, students don't typically come to my library instruction sessions like, yes.
That way.
But they always leave that way, sure, yeah. But try to make it kind of an engaging experience, because if you have those positive sort of emotional memories of learning something, then it helps with that. That's not really, I think, the kind of affective piece that you're talking about. I think it's part of it is trying to tie it to life, like you're saying, like. So, maybe you would just disregard I know over the last few months, I got a lot of junk mail, right? So, about people and what they believed in and what, why I should vote for them and all this kind of stuff. And so I pretty much just tossed all that stuff aside. I didn't sit down and say, let me look at this. Is this true? Let me Google it and find out, because I didn't really spend that much time with it, because I had other avenues of getting the information that I wanted to find. So I think it's talking about the different kind of stakes for different types of information. So your English 101 TA that says you have to find 2 peer-reviewed scholarly articles for this assignment doesn't really care if you like that or not, right? They don't really care if that's a good experience for you. So I think trying, on our part, what we can try to do is draw those connections to something that would be a good, something that would be pertinent to you personally in your life. I think that's really hard, because, a lot of our students are never going to they're not even going to have access to peer-reviewed scholarly articles after they graduate necessarily, right? That's not all out there available to them. So it's about trying to make those
And
connections.
are they useful when you're actually seeking information? Is that stuff useful? It's useful when I'm doing research, capital R, but is it
useful when you want to buy
what
a
car should I buy?
Yeah.
Is it?
I didn't read a scholarly article.
I read things
But Consumer
that
Reports
supported,
is good.
Yeah, I read things that supported what the car I already wanted.
Right.
So
Well,
yes, I will be validated now.
Right. And that is, I think, the way that we do a lot of that kind of information seeking is like, I'm going to buy this car. Let me find
Things
this
that
stuff
say I
about this
should.
car, So.
Well, it goes back to the pumpkin pie. It's going to be my comfort. Am I going to go to YouTube and watch the pumpkin pie being made? Am I going to go, oh, my mother always used Land O'Lakes butter and they have a recipe for pumpkin pie, so that will be my gold standard. That's the emotional tie, and sometimes we have nothing to do with where that emotion comes from. It's something rooted deeper than something that has been a skill put upon someone.
I want to interrupt because it's almost that time when we're going to break into different groups. And I want to point out a couple of things that are in your packet. One is the list of breakout rooms. If you did not pre-register, you may not be on the list. So just pick any room that you like or go with your friend or whatever. But we did separate people so that there was always a school library media person in every room, because we want to talk across all these different kinds of library organizations. So there's also the facilitators. There's a list of questions that you're going to kind of talk about. One of the panelists will be in each room. There's also a handout in there. One of the reasons I got interested in this topic is I was trying to differentiate between information literacy, digital literacy, transitional literacy, health literacy, financial literacy, all of these different kinds of literacies. Where does information literacy fit into those different kinds of literacy? And so I put together a kind of a glossary of these different kinds of literacies, and you'll see that a lot of them sort of overlap. You talked about media literacy, and actually UNESCO now calls it information media literacy or media information literacy. I can't remember. They've mushed them together. So anyway, in your breakout groups, have a nice conversation. There will be recorders. One of our grad students will be in there. There's a faculty member in each room. facilitating the conversation. And then we're going to come back at 3 o'clock, and we're going to try to come to some sort of consensus around those questions. My sister, who is a nurse, went to a conference, and they were trying to understand this one particular phenomenon. I won't tell you what it is because my sister deals with really gross stuff. So they were trying to understand this phenomenon, and they had a consensus meeting of all these different nurses. How are we going to recognize that phenomenon? And that's what I'd like to bring back to this wrap-up meeting at 3 o'clock, is how do we recognize that information literacy, even if it doesn't exist as something stable and that we can write into standards, even if it exists sort of outside of those things. How can we recognize it? How can we cause it to grow across the lifespan? And we'll see you at 3 o'clock. Thank you very much. Thank you to my speakers.
This is good, and it also has a little that goes with it. So